Hello and welcome. I'm Julie Bugini, and this debate is on a matter of facts. Our theme today is facts and reason, supposedly essential to make progress and to make a better world. At least that's what we used to say. Now it seems everybody has their own facts, and world leaders like Trump and Putin have their own alternative ones. But then they turn around and claim that the so-called facts of the liberal elite and the mainstream media are equally dubious, and reason, facts, handmaiden perhaps, is derided by many as a typically male bludgeon to deny alternative views. So should we welcome this challenge to facts and reason as a progressive move undermining the authority of traditional Western hierarchies founded on establishment prejudice? Or is the undermining of facts and reason singularly dangerous, threatening a belligerent world with no shared framework and no communication? Well, I take it as a matter of fact that we have an excellent panel to discuss this. Sophie-Grace Chappell is Professor of Philosophy at the Open University in the UK, and her areas of interest are epistemology, politics, ethics, and feminism. Professor of Philosophy at Stockholm University, Anandi Hattiangadi's research covers the philosophy of mind and language, epistemology, and metaethics. Simon Blackburn is a leading philosophy professor and originator of the metaethical view of quasi-realism. He says he's not a proponent of popularizing philosophy, but he is certainly one of our best communicators of it. So welcome to you all. So we're going to just start by giving you all 3 minutes to set out your philosophical stall. And I'm going to start with just a very general question. Should we welcome the challenge to facts and reason that we're seeing? And let's just take it from the top. Sophie-Grace, do you want to kick us off?
Well, should we welcome which challenge to facts and reason? There are a number of challenges, and some of them come from various kinds of pragmatist philosophy, perhaps, and they're the more acceptable challenges, in my view. And some of them come simply from people who have a brute lust for power and who want to get rid of what is inconvenient to their political agendas. So if people want to have an abstract discussion of what it means to say that things are true or false, then that's fine by me. But when people are bending the notion of truth to suit their own political agendas, when people are simply ignoring facts, ignoring truths in order to get their way in politics, then I think that's extremely dangerous. And I think what's particularly dangerous in this post-truth mood that we have, when, for example, Michael Gove says that the UK public has had enough of experts, or when President Trump simply comes out with utter nonsense about injecting disinfectant. I think that's profoundly dangerous and profoundly retrogressive, actually. It's not progressive in the slightest. It takes us backward, not forward. And one of the biggest reasons why, well, you can name a big reason from the humanities, if you like, and a big reason from the sciences. The big reason from the humanities is that I think it's crucial that in a democracy, our debate, our discussion, should be governed by what I call conversational norms, which is a term I picked up from the work of Paul Grice in his wonderful paper, Logic and Conversation. He talks about the norms of conversation, he talks about the norms of communicating with each other. And Grice says that norms are things like willingness to listen to each other, making statements which include everything that's relevant and true, and nothing that isn't both relevant and true. One can, I think, get from Grice's norms, which are meant just as logical and conversational norms, one can get actual ethical norms by thinking about those a bit more and extending them a bit more. And the idea would be, I think, that we're in a republic of conversation, we have to respect each other, and even more than respecting each other, to echo Aristotle, we have to respect the truth. That's a crucial part, I think, of humanistic inquiry. It's also a crucial part of science for a very simple reason, which is that evolution filters out fact recalcitrance over time. If you don't live in a way which respects the brute facts, and brute facts is perhaps the right phrase here, about how the world is, then you will die. Your species will die out. If you take disinfectant instead of a vaccine for the virus, you will die. It's as simple as that. You'll get selected out. It's not for nothing that people talk of there being a Darwin Award sometimes on the internet. Well, the Darwin Award is an award for it's an award for getting yourself selected out of the gene pool. It's an award for those who don't respect the facts.
Thanks very much, and perfect timing, which is quite rare, especially for a philosopher, I have to say. So good for you. Anandi, what do you take of this issue, welcoming the challenge to facts and reason? And as Sophie-Grace has already pointed out, we have to say which challenges we welcome and which we don't. It's not a single question.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think there are several different challenges to facts and reason. And I want to take a minute to distinguish two of them that I think are particularly worth mentioning. One of them has been kind of associated with left-wing progressives, typically in humanities departments, and it's a kind of relativist challenge. The other one is the thing that I think is coming from the populists, and I'm going to say something about that next. So first, the challenge that comes from the left, from the progressives in the academy, is a kind of relativist challenge that's grounded in the works of Thomas Kuhn, for example, and the later Wittgenstein. Relativism about reason, in this sense, is the idea that there are no standards for reasoning that are really rational, that are really objectively the right standards that you should adopt across all contexts and all cultures. So there's no asymmetry, really, between science and the norms of science, the norms that we adopt when we engage in science, as compared to astrology or tea leaf reading. It's just that some norms are accepted in some cultures and some are different norms are accepted in others. Relativism about facts, I think, is this kind of social constructivist idea that facts are not chunks of reality that are out there waiting to be discovered. Rather, the facts are something that we project onto the world, right? So science, again, is not privileged as a particularly effective way of coming to know these independently existing facts, right? There's just different ways in which we might construct them. So you might think that that kind of challenge is to be welcomed, right? It was, when I was a grad student in the late 90s, it was all the rage to issue these kinds of challenges to facts and reason. And for many people, this came out of a kind of view that it was aligned with progressive values in some sense. So, for example, I think there were lots of feminist critiques of science that demonstrated the extent to which science is, operates with gender stereotypic biases. And it seemed like a natural extension of this to say that it's not just the scientific research, the beliefs, but the very logic and scientific method are masculine constructs. And this seemed like some kind of radical extension of the feminist project. Second, I think people thought that relativism promotes tolerance in some sense towards other ways of knowing, right? Because it allows us to validate the belief systems of others. We can say, for example, that the Azande belief in witchcraft is, true relative to them. And we can say that, believing on the basis of oracles is rational relative to one set of standards. That seems to sort of be a way of validating other ways of knowing. But I don't think that this is really, I think this is super misleading, so I don't think that it is, in fact, progressive. So on the one hand, I think relativism just takes the sting out of the feminist critiques of science, because if there is no really objective rationality, then we can't show that science is biased against this objective standard. Secondly, I don't think that relativism really is in itself recommending that we should be tolerant towards other views, because it doesn't really counsel anything of that kind at all.
Okay. I mean, it is a fact that you've had significantly over 3 minutes, so perhaps we can save some of the more thoughts for later. Particularly, I'm sure we'll come back to populism, but thanks for that. Mm-hmm. Simon, what would you like to add to this stall, this set of stalls, this sort of marketplace of ideas?
I'm not sure I've got very much to add. I think both speakers have set out things very admirably. I think that from the get-go in the 80s and 90s, as Anandi said, when a certain kind of relativism or anything goes sort of postmodernism became all the rage in left-wing circles, I always thought, no, there's something wrong about this. It's inflated. For example, when people say that everybody's got their own facts, that's an inflated way of saying that sometimes people believe different things. We all know that. You grow up knowing that. And people do believe different things. And if people say, everybody's got their own reasons, yes, indeed, some people will take one thing as a reason for something and other people don't. And so it's just something about which people hold different beliefs, or if you prefer, different attitudes. But of course, it doesn't follow that no one attitude is better. And often they are. Our beliefs form, in the wonderful words of Frank Ramsey, somebody, a Cambridge figure, not an Oxford figure like Grice, but never mind. He said that our system of belief is the system with which we confront the world, with which we come to the future. And in that system, there are certain fairly fixed points: that the Earth is round, that the sun is about 92 million miles away, that some diseases are caused by bacteria and others by viruses, and so on. There's an endless number of things which you've got to be dotty to challenge. And as Sophie-Grace said, if you do go around challenging them, Darwin will strike, because these are things which, if you get wrong, you may die because of you getting that wrong. So I think there's no doubt that there's a core that nearly everybody sane is going to share. I dare say President Trump isn't going to share it, but then that just makes the point. The problem, I think, is not with people having different beliefs, because we know how to argue about that. The problem, I think, is when people think that somehow they've got a right to the different beliefs, that it means that they don't have to listen to other people, that you can retreat into a bubble or a silo and wrap yourself up and you don't have to think anymore. And that's laziness. It's also inconsiderate and rude. And I think it's, again, ultimately self-defeating. Because if you don't test your beliefs, if you don't listen to other people's arguments, then eventually you get fossilized, you become stuck in some sort of rut. No guarantee at all that the rut is a useful one, no guarantee at all that it's even one that's going to enable you to survive. And I think it's inconsiderate. And to take a very simple example, pertinent today, take the anti-vax movement. Now, these are people who think that there are reasons, not usually stated, for doubting that the medical profession knows what it's doing when it cancels vaccinations, and who think that their own children are sufficiently important not to need to assist others in becoming immune to something like measles or whatever. And I think they're inconsiderate. I think they're profoundly wrong in their epistemology. They're wrong in what they believe about vaccination and about the medical profession. And I think they're very, very dangerous. And worse than that, I think they're very, very rude, because by not listening to other people, they're putting themselves on a pedestal. It's a sort of egoism which needs taking down a peg or two, I think.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.